and also brings these events to us, often at a loss, but it's just such incredible work, and yay Nat. Moving on to yay Nev. Nev's someone that I met a couple of years back at a conference, I think, and have followed with great interest since, even recently enjoying the update that turtlenecks are part of Nev's life. I've read, Nev has another book, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but the book we're talking about today is The Pronoun Lowdown, Demystifying and Celebrating Gender Diversity. And Nev, I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you is what caused you to write this book? What was the motivation for this book?
Cool. Thanks so much, Misty. And I just want to say such a heartfelt thank you for having me, Nat. That was such a beautiful introduction, and just I feel really humbled and I feel really full of gratitude. Like, it's so meaningful for me to be in spaces where I'm really wanted. Like, people are excited for me to be there, because I also do a lot of work in trans training with a lot of people who aren't on side, you know. So to begin an event that way, I feel much more open. Like, I feel openness. I feel like I can be vulnerable in this space, and that is a real gift, because I think that comes quite infrequently in the world that we live in anyway. So thank you so much for that. And I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge the true custodians of the land on which I'm standing, which are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I think, you know, when we speak about gender, when we speak about activism, when we speak about storytelling, it's so important to really understand the 80,000 plus years of history that exist in this country. And I really extend my greatest and utmost respect to any First Nations people who are here. All activism must centre your voices and your solidarity and your sovereignty. And yeah, also just want to say that acknowledgements of country really mean shit all if they're not followed up with action and with really true consideration of what it means to be a settler on stolen land. So I just want to begin with that and hold that in my heart through this session and every moment that I exist in this beautiful land. Why did I write this book? Well, in part because people kept reading my other book and still misgendering me, which was really frustrating. And, you know, like, I would do speaking gigs and people would introduce me using the wrong pronouns. And I mean, it's funny because professionally I'm an advocate, but in my personal life, I find it really difficult to advocate for myself and for my pronouns. And, you know, if there are other non-binary people here, like, you know how hard it is to, or, you know, not necessarily non-binary, but any trans people, it's so hard to advocate for your pronouns, for your name, like, and you feel like such a failure when you don't. And so I still absolutely live with that all the time. I'm not an expert in advocating for myself, even if it may seem that way. So I thought, what is a good, somewhat passive-aggressive way to tell people I'm annoyed? Maybe I'll write a book and put that out in the world. But yeah, it was very clear to me, I guess, that pronouns seem to be our next Everest post-marriage equality. And I think in a similar way, pronouns are made to be this pinnacle when they're really just not the most important issue. Similarly to marriage equality, in my mind, you know, it was made as like, this is the like absolute forefront of our movement. This is what we have to attain, and then we'll be okay. And it's like, to be completely honest, I don't really care if people use the wrong pronouns to me if they're giving me access to healthcare or housing or employment or some of the really fundamental needs that trans people don't have access to. You know, our unemployment rates are through the roof, like homelessness is rife with queer youth and with trans youth. And so pronouns is really not the be all and end all, but as far as I see it, it is a vehicle to get us there. And it is something that is just such an easy preventative measure that we can put in place in suicide prevention and in mental health care for our communities. So it felt to me like there are a lot of people who really want to understand. And I think more often than not, I find people who want to learn, who want to do the right thing, but they're just not quite sure how to, and language is evolving so quickly. And, you know, something that's been coming up quite a lot lately is people have been saying to me, you know, what do you say to people who say that language is evolving so quickly they just can't keep up? And I said, I totally get that. I feel that way about technology. You know, things are moving so fast. I just like can't wrap my head around it. I feel like such a grandpa all the time. And I just upgraded my phone from an iPhone 6 to an iPhone 10, right? We're on 12 or something now. And I had such like change fatigue. There was no iPhone jack, like the headphone jack. There's no middle button. Like, I don't know how to take a screenshot anymore. I'm just like beside myself. And I think the reality is probably if I had upgraded sooner, it would have been much less overwhelming to me. And I guess that's kind of my advice in approaching some of these topics, is like taking it step by step, doing it slowly, but getting involved now so that it's less overwhelming down the track. And now that's not to conflate consumerism with trans politics. I'm not saying you should go out and buy every iPhone, but I think the message is there, you know? And so I really prioritize safe, nourishing spaces for people to ask questions and go on those journeys, because I wasn't born politically aware, you know, like I had lots of people around me who led me through that, sometimes harshly, sometimes softly. And I guess because it is my job and a responsibility that I take on, obviously not all marginalized people want to be educators, but for me, I really enjoy holding that space. And I really believe that if you can't explain something to a 3-year-old, you probably don't understand it. So I'm really interested in turning things that are somewhat complicated or nuanced or complex into digestible materials for people to work with and to learn from.
Yeah, look, and this book, it's not only gorgeous, it is really accessible and a really pleasant read. So I was wondering, you know, was there a target group that you had in mind for this, or was it really sort of, you know, something that could be used as an educational tool for young people and older people alike?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, book publishing is such a strange monster because we have all these categories like young adult and fiction and non-fiction and middle grade and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of it is really just a selling point. It's not really about the spirit or the soul of a book. It's about how to get it on the shelves. I didn't know that my first book, Finding Nevo, was a young adult book until I saw it in Readings Kids and was like, huh, that's weird. You know, I just like really had no idea. And so I think my intention with this book and my last book was to speak to those who want to learn, who want accessible and understandable pieces of information. But more than anything, it was for me at 16 or 17 who had absolutely no trans representation, which, you know, maybe sounds obvious to people, but this was 2013, not that long ago, really, in the scheme of things. And I feel like in some ways, and obviously this is, you know, relative to my bubble and my country that I live in and whatever, but I feel like I was part of the last generation of trans people to grow up with no representation, which is phenomenal. Like, what a gift that is. You know, watching Disclosure recently on Netflix and the way they move through the meanings of trans representation and how it's been constructed, it just hit me. And I was like, it was like an out-of-body experience. So my goal in my work is always, I guess, to be the person that I never had growing up, to show people and to model for young people that their lives can be beautiful, that they can be loved, that people will want them around, that they can have families, that they can have futures, you know, because if you don't see that, how do you model your life off it, you know? And I think for me, I think as queer people, we do a lot of deconstructing. We deconstruct systems and we deconstruct milestones like marriage and families and the nuclear family. You know, we're doing lots of deconstructing. And sometimes what I find is that I'm just surrounded by rubble and I don't know how to rebuild. I don't have the blueprints. I don't have the intergenerational relationships. I don't have the role models to actually rebuild and create the life that I want. And so I guess I find that that's something that I've tasked myself with, but that I'm tasked with is to show and to model what that could look like for other people. And also because, you know, when people come out as trans, they're really they're babies, you know, they're fetuses in this experience, and then they're expected to be educators to everyone around them. And it's like, I'm just figuring it out for myself. You know, at 17, I was having to explain to my doctors, to my psych, to my family, to my school, to everyone around me. And at that really pivotal moment, I was in the most dangerous position that I possibly could be. I mean, trans and gender diverse young people have a 1 in 2 attempted suicide rate, 48.1%. And that is an Australian statistic, you know, and it's a statistic, but it's also my friends, my community, my family, myself, you know. And so it's a very dangerous point in time when people are unraveling their identity, reinventing themselves, re-understanding themselves, and reimagining their futures, and then having to justify, having to explain, and having to educate. So I guess what I see my books as is hopefully a resource that they can direct people to so they don't have to do that work.
Yeah, I saw, I think it might have been on Instagram, you'd posted some feedback from a young person that you'd received about one of your books and how they'd spoken about you as an older person who'd already been through this journey. And I imagine that that happens a lot.
It does, and it's weird because I'm 25. So I'm like, when did I become an older person? I went into a school recently and I did a speech and I referenced Destiny's Child, and no one knew what I was talking about. And I was like, is this the moment? Like, is this the moment where you feel old for the first time? Because I'm feeling, I'm there. I'm, you know, and I'm sure to the older people in the audience that sounds ridiculous, but I really am experiencing it. It's bizarre. I'm not on the TikTok. I don't get what it's all about. Whatever. Anyway, I'm still dealing with my lack of headphone jack. Okay, it's a lot. Yeah, I've had some really beautiful messages from young people who have said things like that, and it's hard to put to words what that is like, and it's hard to make it seem really genuine as well. But I mean, I went to, you know, the Bendigo Writers Festival a couple of years ago, which is a, you know, a regional writers festival, and I was on a panel and this young person asked a question and I gave them a copy of my book that was available for me to give out to people. And it wasn't until afterwards that they came up and gave me a note and then ran away. And I read that note, and in it, they revealed that they are trans, that they only recently came out, which I didn't know of them at all. You know, I just was like, great question, here's a book. They'd recently come out, that their friends had been really supportive, but that they had found my book in their school and they had brought it home. And when their mum found it, she burnt it. She burnt the school's copy of my book. Now, as a Jewish author as well, with a history and an intergenerational trauma of burnt books and lost knowledge and lost kind of cultural relics, that hit me in a very intersectional part of my body, you know. But it also made me realize that I must be doing something sacred or magical if it is that controversial that someone would burn it. And that's what activism is. Activism is pissing people off, you know, because if you're not pissing people off, no one's going to change. Why would they if they're comfortable? So it was a real eye-opening moment for me and for this young person, and the serendipity that I had handed them a book and just like that whole experience. And, you know, they reached out to me on Instagram a while later and sort of thanked me and connected with me. And it's really, yeah, I can't describe what that's like, but I have to just keep reminding myself of what that would have meant for me as a 16-year-old. And, you know, I don't tell these stories because I'm like, look how amazing I am. Look at all the things that I'm doing. I tell them because I think that trans young people are just desperate for connection and desperate for relationships and desperate for modeling, you know, and I'm so grateful that I can do that for them and offer that gift. And I need it too, you know. I feel that when I see other non-binary and trans people living their best lives. So it's such a privilege and such a gift.
So in that first book that you were talking about, now it's Finding Nevo, isn't it? But that's not how you say your name.
Yeah. It's my name's pronounced Nevo, and people like say, oh, well, you know, I thought it was Nevo because of the book. And I'm like, people were calling me Nevo way before the book. It's a reclaimed slur, if you will. But I do have a Nemo tattoo and it felt like a good opportunity. And there was a part of me which no longer wants this, but there was a part of me that really wanted to get on Ellen one day. And I felt like if she saw Finding Nevo as Dory, maybe she would do an audiobook version. Anyway, that was the dream initially, but she became a bit of a sellout, assimilationist kind of capitalist gay person.
So you've sort of brought this upon yourself, but no, I'm not going to call you that. I want to talk about the book though. In that book, you kind of tell the story of how you came to understand your identity at a given point in time. Can you tell everyone a little bit about that? Like so what gender is to you, its relationship with your sexuality and other intersections of identity?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, look, I think the funny thing about kids especially is that they don't know that they're different until it's pointed out to them, because they're just living their lives and having fun and finger painting and, coming up with beautiful imaginative environments, and then it occurs to them that they're different, whether it's from their peers, whether it's from their parents. I think parents have more often than not the best intentions at heart. But sometimes when they see difference in their young people, they're so worried and so protective about that going wrong that they try and condition that difference out of them. And I think what that ends up doing is that parents become their kids' first bullies. And I think that's something that kids remember forever, So my mum was very set on the fact that I was a girl and that I was going to be a girl and that meant certain things. And from the age of 4, I rebelled against that. I was like, no, I'm not a drama queen. I'm a drama king. I was fine with being dramatic. I just wanted to be the correct gender royalty. And, I felt an aversion to that very quickly. I felt all of these expectations piled on me. I guess at birth, I signed a contract that I would grow up, get married and have kids, which I never realized I did. And it's so funny to me when people come out as gay and their families really mourn this thing that was never a given in the first place. I mean, there are lots of straight people who don't have kids. There are lots of people who are infertile. There are lots of there are lots of issues with climate change. Maybe we don't all need to be reproducing as fast and as much as we possibly can. There are lots of considerations, and there's lots of gay people who do have kids. So it was very interesting to have that contract signed at birth. But yeah, I didn't feel comfortable in that, and it felt pretty obvious to me for about 5 years of my childhood. And I guess in time that unraveled in high school. I started questioning my sexuality. I came out as a lesbian very young at 15, was dating girls in high school. And, that's absolutely a gift. And it's also very challenging. Like, I know there are very much pros and cons to coming to your identity later on in life versus in high school. High school is like such a breeding ground for mental illness and for bullying. And I think, when you are already on the outskirts, that can be especially painful. And then I guess I had packaged up my early childhood as being indicative or foreshadowing of the fact that I was a lesbian. I was like, yeah, okay, I was a tomboy as a kid because I'm attracted to girls. And what I hadn't really considered is that I started telling people I was a boy when I was 4. So it wasn't really about my attraction. I wasn't attracted to anyone. I was 4. I was like, my own little blob. And so it became clear to me that there was something else going on. And I came out as trans at 17 in year 12. I don't necessarily recommend that. Year 12 is a pretty hardcore time in general. So, I was grappling with anxiety and depression and was like, what can I add to this cocktail of crap that will make it much worse? And I thought, gender, that'll be fun. And when I go into high schools, I always say to them, I just want you to remember that at the end of the day, high school ends. And this is where you are all the time, and this is your world. But before you know it, you will be many years on the other side of it, still won't believe that you are, and you will actually have the opportunity to create the life for yourself that you want, and surround yourself with people who understand you, who don't make you justify yourself, who love you, who see you in your entirety, and so that's a real gift that I feel like I'm able to offer high school students. But yeah, and then, like coming out as trans, experiencing this like very strange shifting in society from being perceived as a woman to being perceived as a man. I was always a very outspoken, angry lesbian feminist and was very passionate about feminism, and to then experience male privilege in a very real, tangible way was bizarre, even just the language that people used for me, like going from sweetheart, darling, ma'am, honey, to dude, bro, mate, man, like one of them creates a real power imbalance and is kind of almost condescending, and the other makes it out like we are part of a covenant of brothers, like we are relatives, like we are family. You know, I became best mates with every 7-Eleven clerk, and it was really uncomfortable. Like it felt good, and that good feeling was uncomfortable, you know, and suddenly I was privy to all of the disgusting misogynist language that men, you know, some men speak about with each other that they never spoke about when they saw me as a lesbian, because they knew not to. But then suddenly I was like this undercover ninja who was privy to all this language, and it was like, do I call it out and potentially out myself? Do I not say anything and betray my moral compass? You know, what position am I in now? People stopped interrupting me as much. They stopped speaking over me. They laughed at my jokes more, same jokes, laughed at my jokes more. The words that I used to get, like bossy and emotional and controlling, became assertive and professional and confident. It's just so interesting, because it's like, I am the same person. I am absolutely the same person. And just because I have facial hair, and my voice is lower, that shifts. And, you know, I found myself disadvantaged in certain areas for being a man as well, which I definitely didn't expect, like working with children. Suddenly there was so much more suspicion around my interest in working with kids. You know, I mean, before I transitioned, I'd be at the supermarket and I would look at a kid and I'd make silly faces, and their parents would just hand them to me. They're like, do you want to cuddle? I'm like, absolutely, yes. But as soon as I had a beard, they were sort of like, oh, why are you looking at my kid? Like, what's going on? And it's like, dads exist. Like, that's not a controversial opinion. Like, dads exist. They like kids. They've chosen to have them. You know, like, a man being interested in hanging out with kids is like not a suspicious thing. I understand why people feel that way, but it was a very interesting shift. And I think for me, the real moment where I felt so caged in by these expectations in a big way was, you know, for a lot of women, or probably all women in our society, or anyone who has been socialized as a woman, going home late at night, there are plans. You have plans. You know to message your friends when you get home. You might walk with your keys in between your hands. You might not take public transport. I used to dial 000 and have it ready on my phone just in case. I used to walk past men at night and be like, hey, Dad, how was bodybuilding class? You're a mere second away. Okay, good to know, you know, and things like that. And once I transitioned, that didn't just automatically change. I wasn't just suddenly really comfortable on the street. But what I started to notice over time was that women began to look over their shoulders at me, that I had somewhere, somehow become the threat. What do you do in that situation? You know, do you say like, oh, don't worry, I'm not going to attack you? I used to be a woman. It's fine. You know, like there's nothing you can really do in that circumstance. And that was when I started to cultivate and learn a healthy masculinity, and also what it means to exist in a body that is constantly gendered, whether you want it to be or not, you know. And that was when I realized that I was non-binary, that I was a combination of masculinity and femininity, that all of the multiplicities of me exists inside my body at any given time, and that I don't want to go from one limited gender box to a slightly bigger gendered box. You know, I don't believe that anyone is liberated by these boxes. I mean, obviously some people are more comfortable in them than others, but the idea of categorizing 7.8 approximately billion people into two categories just feels inherently restrictive, you know. And even for cis people, like I've never met a cis man who said to me, you know, when I was a kid and I fell off my bike and grazed my knee and I was crying, and my dad came over and he said, man up, don't be such a wuss. That was great. Really glad he said that. I felt really validated, and I haven't had any emotions ever since. And that's a gift. I've never heard that before. I've never heard a woman say to me, I love when I'm impassioned and I'm talking about something I care about and someone tells me I must be on my period. I love that because I'm constantly on my period and it informs all of my perspectives on things. You know, like I think we have all felt limitations at some point in our lives around these sort of gendered expectations. So the work that I do is not just for trans people, it is the liberation of all of us. You know, it is the ability to come to the table as who we are and to be received as who we are, not the expectations that people are projecting onto us. So that was kind of my many comings out. And I come out every couple of years just to keep people on their toes. You know, I don't want people to get too comfortable.
I love that. You talk about gender, so at the moment, as being for you, you're encapsulating masculinity and femininity and all of these ideas of gender. For myself, I think about gender as just not, it doesn't feel applicable to me. So I feel I would say agender, but I typically will say non-binary because people know what that means now. So can you talk a bit about that? Like, can you talk a bit about, well, no, wait, let me make it more of a question. Can you talk a bit about the future of gender? Like, so I would like to think that gender won't exist anymore, for example. What about you?
Yeah, cool. That's really interesting. I definitely understand, people who are agender or like just don't really experience those feelings or have gender inside their bodies in that way. I feel like I have so much gender inside my body. Like I'm bursting at the seams with gender. And so I guess I've had like in the past arguments with binary trans people because they're like, is your goal to obliterate gender? I'm not opposed to that happening, but that's not my goal. My goal is for all of our genders, all 7.8 billion of them, to be held and to be understood. And if that gender is a lack of gender or no gender at all, like I want a world in which people are met as three-dimensional people and individuals, and that these assumptions and these stereotypes are not created around us. And I mean, I think that plays into so much liberation. I'm not just fighting for the liberation of trans people. I'm fighting for First Nations justice, for refugee justice, for disability justice, for, so many intersectional racial justice. Like everything is related to these same oppressive tools, and they are distributed across these marginalized communities, and the weapons are the same, So yeah, my goal is not to rid the world of gender. My goal is to rid the world of oppression.
You kind of touched on how things are not great for trans and gender diverse people at the beginning, and there's some really great research that's come out recently, Private Lives 3, which kind of reiterates that in a sense, but does it in a lot more depth than research typically does. But you also talk about in your book about gender euphoria, and I want you to talk a bit about that for people who don't understand what it is, what it feels like.
Yeah, it's such a nice question. I think that trans people, for the most part, and maybe especially younger trans people, have been really trying to pivot this tragedy narrative that has surrounded trans lives of, born in the wrong body and oppressed by a whole society and, coming out of it and suicide and mental illness and all of this stuff that are very real parts of our lives. But I'm not miserable to be trans. I'm so grateful that I'm trans. I love being trans. Queer people invented glitter. We invented parties. We live beautiful, colorful rainbow lives. There's a reason why hens nights are always at our clubs, like don't feel sorry for us. We're having a bloody good time. And we live on the outskirts of these barriers and these borders. We live our own freedoms. And that is like such a deeply embodied gift. So I think what I find really funny is the way that we kind of create this us and them, and the way that we look at trans people as having a very different experience in the world and in their gendered bodies than everyone else does. But I often just think like, I would love for a cis person to talk to me about what it feels like to be completely and utterly comfortable in your body. Oh, you don't? Wow, because we live in a society that profits off our self-doubt, and because we live in a fat phobic, white supremacist world that, only looks to certain Eurocentric standards of beauty, and none of us can live up to that. Like there are so many ways that cis people are also assimilating or conforming into gendered boxes, whether it's through haircuts or fashion or makeup or gymming or whatever. And that's not putting any judgment. I do literally all of those things. But we are constantly making choices about our gendered bodies and the ways that we want to be perceived and felt and seen in the world. And so gender euphoria, I would argue that not every trans person experiences dysphoria, and it doesn't make you more or less trans. But I would imagine, and maybe Misty, I'm interested if you, as someone who doesn't really experience or doesn't associate with gender in this sort of way, whether gender euphoria is something you feel in your body or experience, I would really love to hear that. But I think for the most part, most people have experienced gender euphoria or do experience gender euphoria, which is the fundamental feeling of being seen, feeling like you belong, feeling like you can show up for exactly who you are. For me, that can come in wearing certain outfits, that can come in when my housemate calls me a good Jewish mother, like that is gender euphoria for me. It's kind of a sickly sweet feeling where I just feel seen in my entirety. I don't feel compartmentalized. And I feel like I can bring my full self to the table. And I think that that is a really beautiful feeling. And I encourage everyone in the audience, whether you're trans or cis, to reflect on what some of your moments of gender euphoria have been, because I imagine that you probably have experienced them. You know, maybe becoming a parent for the first time felt like gender euphoria. Maybe your parents telling you they're proud of you felt like gender euphoria. Maybe, you know, whatever it might be, maybe wearing a suit that was tailored to your body felt like gender euphoria. Like, I think that everyone has had those experiences somewhat in some version in their lives. And I think that that is a much more celebratory way of looking at transness, that when you experience gender euphoria and you know what it feels like to be your full self, and that affirms for you that that is where you want to go in your life, that is what I've experienced in my transition. It's much more seeking that sickly sweet feeling rather than running away from the tragedy or the discomfort.
Love that. And it's one of those things that doesn't get spoken about as much, like you said. I think, like, reflecting on that gender euphoria, I think I would probably suggest that for myself, I have agender euphoria. So, you know, when I'm walking down the street and a kid says to their parent, is that a boy or a girl?
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, when I'm wearing a suit with a flowery shirt, you know, those types of things that kind of trouble gender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would so agree with that. I think being confusing for me is gender euphoria. I think being annoying and bratty and making people like really burst their minds open is gender euphoria, you know, like unfortunately, but like seeing my mum's face when I put a dress on and she's like, what the fuck are you doing? You know, I tried to force you into a dress your whole childhood. And I'm like, keyword is force. Consent and autonomy are probably the important things, you know, but just how disruptive, like being disruptive for me is euphoria. So I so get that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that as well.
Yeah, and I love the image of a dress and a beard, you know, I love that. It's beautiful.
I just want like really big muscles with my dresses. That's like why I work out as well, because I just really, the aesthetic of like beard, hairy chest, muscles, and a strappy dress is like everything I'm going for.
Love that. I want to, at this point, on that note, just check if anyone wants to ask any questions of Nev while we still have time. Has anybody, or if you want to write a question in the chat, or if you want to just unmute yourself, go ahead.
Yeah, please bring it on. Misty, do you want to, we can keep chatting, and then while that's happening and we've planted the seeds now, people can chuck it in the chat or put a little hand up or whatever, because I'm very open to answering any questions that might come up. If you're not sure how to word it exactly as well, I feel like often people are like, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing. But what I can offer you is like a bonus set of steak knives, in that I can give you the answer to your question and then maybe a different way of phrasing it in future as well. So yeah, don't be afraid to jump in.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
I hear a lot from other parents, not necessarily just about gender, but about, you know, about gender and sexuality, about queerness, this fear of their child having to exist in the world, you know, their child having to experience oppression. And I feel like sometimes that can lead people to like you mentioned earlier, I guess to be their child's first oppressor. And I would, with like the most loving of intentions there, I suppose. And I would really love to hear if you have any advice for those people about can, make the children to be in a world that maybe isn't like made to welcome them with open arms,
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really beautiful question, Nat, and I do get that question quite a lot. And I want to obviously as well put a disclaimer and a caveat that like I'm not a parent, and I don't understand so many of the intricacies of being a parent. And I tip my hat to all of you parents out there every single day, because it really does seem relentless and just constant. But I am someone who desperately wants to be a parent one day, and I'm very embedded in a lot of like parenting circles, and I'm part of a pregnancy group on Facebook because I'm very clucky and I really love learning about parenting and how people are approaching it. I think that the best thing that you can do for your child in a hostile world is build resilience and hold a safe space for them to return to. I think as long as you are offering stability and security, chances are they'll be able to tackle anything, because they're very strong little people. They have their own intricate worlds and imaginings and realities, and obviously you want to protect them for as long as possible. But if you've ever met like private school boys who have been sheltered from everything in their life, they're really awful people. So that's really not what you want for your kids. Like you want kids who are going to be resilient and who are going to be strong and who are going to love all of the different parts of themselves. And I think that that's the best thing that you can offer. And obviously that's incredibly painful. And I remember Missy Higgins once described parenting as like literally having your heart outside of your chest. Like you have an organ existing in the world outside of your body and no rib cage to protect it. And I cannot fathom what that's like until I actually have a child, and I know that I will do everything in my power to protect them from the world that exists. But unfortunately, parents are not the sole influences on their children. Well, not unfortunately, I think it's probably a good thing that there is so much around them. And I guess it's just really important to surround them with lots of different people, and to have access to lots of different people that they can speak to and that they can go to. But at the end of the day, to be an empathetic ear. And you don't always, something I talk about with my mum a lot is like, you don't always have to take the side of everybody else. Like she really does a devil's advocacy thing with me often. And she's like, well, they were probably thinking this, or they were, and I'm like, yeah, I actually know. What I would love is for you to just say, that sounds really hard, or I'm really sorry that happened. Or can I cook you something? Like, is there anything I can do? And I think at the end of the day, that's really what you can offer. You can't fix everything. You can't control everything, but you can be an empathetic ear, and you can offer safety and security and validity to their experiences. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. It seems like we're getting lots in the chat now, all in one. So the first one is from Chris. Thank you for your question. I'd love to know if you hold any educational events in schools or child-focused webinars. Yeah, so this is my work full-time. So I made the leap in lockdown to completely back myself and trust myself and just do this work. So I've been doing it for the last 4 or so years, but now it's like my full-time thing. So I run workshops in schools and workplaces. I do a lot of professional development in Trans 101, and I do speeches in schools. And I do writing workshops as well, which is really fun. And I do poetry stuff. But yeah, I do a lot of education in schools, and I think it's really valuable. I'm also starting to move as well into doing some work with birth workers, so midwives, lactation consultants, health workers. And I'm currently planning a retreat that's going to be in the Blue Mountains with a friend of mine who is a Māori birth worker, and it's going to be all about decolonizing birth work and unlearning gender and unlearning kind of gendered norms in our practices. And I think for me, it's such an obvious direction to go in as a trans educator, like to a pre-birth stage, because I think that is where so much of this stuff comes in, So yeah, I think education for young people and for the people who surround young people is incredibly important.
Can I just add to that, Nev?
Yeah.
Although it would be lovely to just bring you over every time we needed something, thanks very much. There are, if you're based in Western Australia or other states, there are organisations and people who do this kind of work locally.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and there's so many amazing people who are doing this work, and I think it's really important that we have an interdependence of networks and we are relying on one another. And at the same time, I also am very happy to travel and am very happy to do things online, especially now in this, sort of somewhat post-COVID world, knowing we can do these events online really quite easily. So yeah, very, very open to that too. Ash has asked, you said you don't care about pronouns, and I feel the same. However, being called exclusively she makes me feel dysphoric as heck. Do you have advice on how to convey any pronouns, words, but only if you actually see me as not a girl? Yeah, absolutely. So Ash, I totally get you. I remember seeing something once, I can't remember exactly the quote, but someone said, you can use any pronouns for me as long as they are said with respect. That my pronouns are respect, like actually just like with integrity and with like understanding my personhood, and unfortunately I don't expect that of cis people most of the time, because I actually don't think that a lot of people are very respectful of each other anyway. I think that we don't live in a society that fosters respect and love and care and a lot of those sort of spiritual practices. So I don't trust cis people to use my pronouns correctly, and so they get they them pronouns. And my trans friends can call me whatever they want. It's kind of how I feel. Like if you see me in my entirety, you can use whatever language. And, people use a lot of femme-coded language for me that I really love, that sits really beautifully in my body, that it didn't before transition, but it does now. My housemates and I have a joke because I have an alter ego named Nathan who comes out whenever tradies come over. Like suddenly I'm just a different person. And one day this like tradie came over and I was like, "G'day, how's it going, mate?" "Yeah, no worries, just like go around the side. Yeah, all good." And I came back into the kitchen and my housemate was like, "Oh, who was that man?" And I was like, "Oh, just the tradie guy." And she was like, "No, the other one." I was like, oh my God, what a call out. So that's Nathan now, we've decided. So yeah, I mean, I so get that. And I think it's really hard to convey that, but I think you can convey that with the people who just understand you and who see you as your full self. I can't promise you that other people will be able to do that or will see that multiplicity, but I think that, more and more people are using multiple pronouns, and I think more people are understanding that if someone uses multiple pronouns, it's not because they want to be called the binary one all the time. It's because they want to switch between them. And I think that's going to become more and more kind of common practice. Yeah. Sebastian's asked, how are you finding your engagements at schools, especially when you have the book burning parents still out and about? Presumably that adds some, that adds some difficulty for students when having to discuss these sorts of topics at home. Yeah, absolutely. So how do we deal with it? I mean, I've had students storm out of my presentations before that were optional opt-in presentations, and I still had them storm out. And that feels pretty badass because I'm like, at the end of the day, I don't really care what 13-year-olds think about me. And high school is like so brutal and they can judge me all they want, but I get to return to my home that doesn't have my parents in it. And, I'm like, I'm sorry, but you got nothing on me right now, I'm afraid. Yeah, look, conservative parents are a really big one. I guess I'm just focused on the resilience of the young people who need it and empowering them. And for the most part, young people are so badass. Like they are way ahead of me in their language and their nuance and their understandings of intersectionality and social justice. I mean, the school strikes for climate are just like so hardcore and so cool. They are the future in every way, but they're also the present, and they have voices that want to be heard. So for the most part, I feel really supported by young people. And yeah, there's often like teenage boys who are chatting and, bitching about me right in front of my face, but I don't care anymore, like none of the teenage boys who treated me like crap in high school are published authors now. That's my momentary petty thing, so I don't really care what they have to say. And I think not caring what they have to say empowers other students to not care. And I can see them feeling empowered by that. And the validity that having a non-binary adult be paid by their school to come in and do educational stuff, I think speaks volumes. And I think a lot of young people really, really appreciate that. Someone has asked if I'm coming to Perth anytime. Not at this stage. If someone wants to bring me up for an event and if someone is willing to pay for my flights, I will absolutely come. I would love to. I have a lot of friends I really want to visit in Perth. I've never been to Perth before. I've been to Margaret River for the Writers' Festival, but never to Perth. So planting the seed, if anyone wants to organise that, it will happen. I'm sorry, Misty, I feel like I'm just now in the chat, just we're not even getting to speak anymore.
This is what we need you to do, Nev.
Okay, great. Ash had another question. This one is from their partner. How do you get people to respect and pay you for your labor as an expert in your own lived experience as a trans queer person? They are a psych and doing some training, but expected to do it for free. Okay, yeah. This is a whole workshop that I would run happily. My number one advice is carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. There are a lot of mediocre white men out there making big bucks doing very mediocre things, which means that you deserve to be paid for your labor as well. I spent so much of my life not being paid. I have done this work for a long time, and it's only in the last few years that I've started getting paid well for it. Your voice, your experience, your lived expertise is really important and is now becoming more valuable. Like people are seeing the value in it now. They don't get to do that work for free. They don't get to tick those boxes, get those rainbow ticks without actually ethically paying for that labor. Because it isn't ethical to expect people to do things for free. You wouldn't go to a restaurant and say, oh, well, don't you just want to make me a meal for exposure? I promise I'll like write a review that will be great. I don't give a crap about your review. You know, I'm giving a service that takes time and energy. And, you know, I then have to pay for therapy. I have to pay for my rent. I have to pay for my bills, for my internet, for everything. I don't owe this to you, you know, no one owes it to you. So I would honestly, I think if you're not getting paid, say no. And we have to set that precedence for each other as well. Like at the beginning of my career, when I was doing that, I wasn't doing it because I believed I should be paid. I was doing it because I believed other trans people should be paid. So I was like, well, if I'm doing it for free, they're certainly not going to go to other trans people who are charging money for it. So that's not fair, you know? And I've had to have that conversation with quite a few trans people who are doing speaking gigs and been like, I hope you're getting paid. And they're like, no, I'm not. And I'm like, okay, well, can you start charging, please? Because no one is going to book my workshop for $1,000 if you're doing it for free, you know? And like, we all collectively, it's almost like unionizing. Like we all need to set the standard of what we are worth. And what I've found is that by setting that standard, I value myself higher. I actually believe in my own worth more. Because it is always the organizations who have no money that will offer you an honorarium and will say like, here's $50, sorry, we don't have more, we really value your time. And it is always the big corporations who will say, oh, we just don't have the budget, can you do it for free? And it's like, make the budget. You do have the money, you just haven't prioritized this. You need to. And I don't care how you get the money. Have a bake sale for all I care. Have a casual Friday where people wear a wacky tie and give $1. I don't care how you get the money, but this is my speaker fee. And when you see how much people charge for public speaking and for this sort of training, you'll know that you deserve to be paid for it. Yeah. Ian said, thank you for a fabulous presentation, Nev. Thanks, Ian. My question is asked from the basis of seeking to build organizational capability. If there was a maturity curve which reflected how far progressed or progressive various countries or societies are, how would you rate Australia globally and where might we look for the most progressive countries or organizations? Thank you. Wow, that's a really good question. Gee, I guess it's really hard to say because if I don't really live in those places, I don't know what the experience is like on the ground in a day-to-day sense. And I think what's really interesting about measuring that is that some countries have really incredible laws or protocols, but not incredible culture. So like Argentina, for example, is very forward-thinking in a lot of their laws and protocols, like sexual health and sex ed is compulsory in schools and is often quite delivered with quite a relatively queer and intersectional lens, but on the ground, trans women in particular live in poverty and can only do survival sex work, which is not to say that, you know, sex work isn't important and a real job, but I think if it's your only option, then that's like not an ideal situation of any job. So it's a very hard measure, because I think you'd need to do it with lots of different axes. I mean, I've heard from students that it's the schools that have the posters that say some boys like boys, or like we are a trans friendly space, that those are the schools that they've been the most bullied in. So it's like, how do you really measure that stuff? I think Australia thinks that as a country, it's much more progressive than it is. I think we live in a very conservative, very racist, and very transphobic and homophobic nation that was built on the back of genocide and has not rectified with our history at all, really. I mean, marginally, we still celebrate the date of colonization. So I think that wherever we think we are, we're at least 10 steps behind that. And I think what's also really challenging is this kind of like between a rock and a hard place. Like in the US, what we're seeing is lots of progressive politics and then this huge backlash against that and running so far in the opposite direction. I mean, there's so many anti-trans bills that are coming into play now in the US that it just becomes so non-linear being able to measure that. And I feel similarly here, you know, with so many different things being brought into Parliament, it's like, it's so hard to say what things will look like in 5-10 years. Like we're certainly taking steps forward and we're also running in opposite directions. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question. Sorry, it's not a more positive one. I've got an anonymous question here. How can I own my place in the LGBTIQA plus community when I'm a woman in a monogamous relationship with a man and have kids? I come across as straight and an ally, but I'm really aching to own my pansexuality, but feel I can't. I would love some advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just so want to hold that in my heart for a moment, because you know, I think multi-gender attraction and the erasure that is often experienced is so real. I mean, Misty is pretty much an expert in this area and can probably speak to it much better than I can, but there is so much research that suggests that multi-gender attracted people or bisexual people actually experience much higher rates of mental health issues than their gay counterparts because of this erasure and because of this, you know, not straight enough for the straight world, not gay enough for the gay world experience. If you are not straight, this is my perspective, but if you are not straight, you're not in a straight relationship. That's just how I feel. I just don't really believe that you, maybe in a straight passing relationship, maybe in a relationship that experiences certain privilege, sure. But if you are queer or pansexual or whatever, then you just are, you know, and your relationship doesn't get to erase that or you know, overshadow that. Who you are is who you are, and it's real and it's beautiful, and it doesn't make you any less queer to be with someone of the opposite gender or whatever. And I think there is so much biphobia in our community, and it's despicable and it sucks. And I'm sorry that you don't feel like you can own that really publicly, or that you can kind of come out in those ways, because, you know, the assumptions made by straight people are just always haunting, and then the assumptions made by queer community as well is really challenging. But I just want you to know that you're valid, that you're real, that your sexuality is real, that you don't have to practice that sexuality all the time for it to be real and for it to be intimate for you, because it's about who you are. And I hope that you have a partner who loves and supports you and holds space for the multiplicities of you. And I know that, you know, hopefully your kid does as well, and that you can teach them about that and show them that different kinds of people exist, even if they're assumed to be a certain way. Just because people assume that I'm a man sometimes doesn't mean that I am, you know. So yeah, I just want to hold that and how real that hurt can be.
Can I just add to that as well? Depending on where you're based, there are actually some really supportive communities for bi and pan folk. So I run Bi Plus Community Perth, but there's also in all the other states, there are groups that you can meet other people, lots of other people in a similar situation to you, and just get a little bit of that peer support.
Yeah, that would also, great advice. Thanks, Misty. I would also recommend getting involved in community. It doesn't have to be dating spaces or, you know, like just getting to speak to other people who are in similar situations is really useful. Ray has asked, have you experienced a group of society identifying as gender diverse who don't identify as trans? I'm finding it extremely difficult being in the same letters of the rainbow acronym. Confused. It's a hard one. I know a lot of non-binary people who don't consider themselves trans. They don't see trans as an umbrella term and they consider themselves outside of that, and that's fine. I think we toe a really, really fine line in these kinds of conversations between holding space for some of the difficulties that arise in that, and also trying not to gatekeep or police other people's identity. It's not for me to really define whether someone is trans or trans enough or whatever. If that's what they call themselves, no questions asked. I definitely know people who choose to use they, them pronouns as more of a political stance and more of a rejection of the gender binary rather than something that exists in their body. And I think that's great. I think that's fine. I think that people need to be conscious of their positionality. I think that if you don't experience gender dysphoria, for example, I don't think that makes you any less trans. But it is a privilege in some sense. It means that you don't feel the need to engage in a medical transition, which can cost a lot of money and whatever. And it's also important to keep that in mind when you're having conversations with other trans people, that experience is not necessarily everyone's experience. But yeah, I don't know if I've met gender non-conforming, maybe, like, people who are breaking gender rules but still identify as cis. I don't have any problem with that. I don't know. I think there's a lot of gatekeeping in our society, so I'm very apprehensive about making any calls about, where to exist on that. I think that if you're feeling confused, maybe that's something to sit with and to grapple with and, have discourse with other people about it. Yeah, I don't know. Misty, do you have thoughts on that one?
My thoughts are very similar to yours, and I've sort of gone back and forth on, do I use the language of trans or do I not? And I probably wouldn't use the language for myself, and I don't even know why. But I'm happy for other people to use that language for me. So, I don't think these things are black and white, and I don't think identity is not as simple as putting yourself in a little box.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it is deeply nuanced. And also, maybe someone doesn't identify as trans right now, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to in future. Like, these things are fluid. So when we look at people and we're like, oh, well, you're a cis man, like you can't be in this space kind of thing. It's like, I was cis until I wasn't, like, I do think there is a fluidity to this. And I do think we need to be careful with how much we then just reinforce the same boxes and the same stereotypes that we're trying to liberate ourselves from, and just meeting people where they're at a little bit. Yeah. Stevie said, I met you at the Margaret River Writers Festival and you signed my book and we talked about how white WA is. That sounds like me. Yeah, that's lovely. It's so nice I can't really see you, but connect with you again. Courtney has asked, in regards to your birth activism / advocacy, what are your core beliefs / drives in this area? Personally, as a birth worker, I attempt to decolonize and have inclusive practices. I find language surrounding birth supercharged with such sacredness and power. Do you find the same? Such a good question, Courtney. All I want to say is, like, come to this retreat. I'm not trying to promote the work, but I really think that especially Amy, who I'm working with, is just magic. Like, she is magic. And she speaks so much about, I recommend following her on Instagram. Her Instagram is Rip Snorter. She's amazing. And she just speaks so much about that kind of divine feminine and that sacredness and that power in a very degendered way, which I think is so wonderful, because what I find is that when white people steal other people's culture, they misunderstand it and they project these Western beliefs onto it. And we've created this divine feminine masculine kind of thing, which is so far removed from its original roots because we don't know its original roots so much, especially as white people, if we're taking those cultural ideas. And so, yeah, I think there are so many ways to talk about the sacredness and power of birth work without using that language. And, like, I think there is so much power in womanhood, and I think there is so much power in manhood, and I think there is so much power in femininity and in masculinity. And I think that all of those things are available to so many of us and to all of us. And it's really ironic to me when I see feminists defining themselves so strongly by their ovaries and by their genitals, because it's like, isn't this exactly what you're trying to rebel against? Like, I don't understand what you're doing here. So yeah, I think it's hard, but I think there is movement in that area. And, I'm connected to a lot of like chest feeding groups, for example, or like trans parents and people who have carried. And I imagine that I might carry a baby inside of me at one point in time. And I don't think that will bring me into my divine feminine. I think that that will be my divinity and my sacredness. And yeah, I think there's a lot, it's hard. And I think, my sister's a midwife, and I think she was really shocked recently when all of that stuff came out about that hospital, I think maybe in the UK, that had made this sort of policy around degendering birth work language, and so much transphobia came out. And I think she was really taken aback by how transphobic a lot of her colleagues were. And she was like, we need your training and we need it now. So I am working with a midwife at the moment to develop a module, an ongoing professional development online module for birth workers. So hopefully that will happen. It will be available. I think it's really complicated, and especially, I find spiritual spaces so often lack the social justice frameworks that they actually really need. And I find social justice, or just general society, often really lacks the spiritual things that they need. So hopefully this retreat is going to be bringing those things together, and the sessions will be recorded as well. So they'll be available afterwards if for whatever reason you can't make it to New South Wales, to the Blue Mountains. But yeah, I'm hoping that that will be a direction that my work will kind of take me in. Yeah, thanks for that great question, Connie. Ash has asked, multi-gender attracted people, the werewolf analogy works best for me. Not a sometimes person, sometimes wolf, always a werewolf, wholly and validly queer and wonderful. I love that. I think that's so good. And I feel that as a Jewish trans person, when people are like, how much has your Judaism influenced your work? And how much has your transness influenced your work? And I'm like, my right arm isn't Jewish and my left arm is trans. Like, I am wholly all of those things. Everything I do is influenced by everything that I am. I can't compartmentalize myself in those ways. The last question that we have at this point from my dear best friend, Maddie Godfrey. I can't even see your face, but I love that you're here. Thank you. I love you. In regards to the self-love workshops you often run, what are your favorite self-care or self-preservation tips for trans and GNC people? What a beautiful question. And I would very much like to end on this question because I think it's brilliant. And Misty, I would love to hear your tactics or your advice as well. I think, firstly, it's really important to be wary of how co-opted self-care has become by like the corporatization of self-care. Like, buying lots of face masks and bubble baths is not self-care. It can be a part of self-care, but I also think doing the really deep work of healing yourself, your story, your ancestry, being accountable to the ways that you have harmed people is a really important part of self-love and self-work. I think for me, being surrounded by people who see me in my multiplicity and who see all of my genders and who see all of the bursting at the seams and who can hold me in everything that I am is a deeply restorative experience. I really like thinking about community care, maybe a bit more than self-care, because I think we do individuals an injustice when we expect them to be able to look after themselves wholly when the systems and the world has let them down. I don't think everyone has access to self-care in the same way. I think that if you are a colonized body on stolen land, access to self-care looks very different. I think if you're a disabled person, access looks very different to self-care. I don't want to sit on my high horse and say like self-love is easy and everyone can access it. It's hard for everyone, and I think, and somewhat much harder for others. And I think, yeah, community care is really important, being deeply accountable to one another, knowing what we all need to keep us alive and putting in preventative measures. I think spending restorative time with queer people that isn't about social clout or hot selfies, but is about the really deep, hard work that we need to do together is really important. I think spending time with babies and with little people and experiencing the ways they see the world. I think embodying gratitude as much as I possibly can, and wonderment, and looking at nature as if it is, you know, as if all of the plants and all of the animals and the sky and the sea are my relatives, and that I am responsible to them, and that I have so much more that I need to give than what I take. And you know, existing in the world and in the land and on the country as an animal within that landscape, you know, and the wonderment that comes from the changing world that we live in, for me is deeply restorative. Disconnecting from online spaces and, you know, restoring my own energy. Saying no is a big is a big practice. Charging for my work is a big self-care practice, absolutely. Yeah, Misty, what are some of yours?
I just feel like you're so sage, Nev. I would have said puppies, but no, I think
I love puppies, please.
puppies, but also I think what you said about accountability, and I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is about figuring out how you can be unapologetically you, whatever that means. So and going about finding that out however that happens. So if you need to have therapy, if you need to explore the history of your ethnicity or whatever that means, just do it and be unapologetic about it. Don't worry about, or try not to worry about how you don't fit in whatever ways. So that, I think, at the individual level, but then I advocate for peer support, like finding people who you can breathe around. So, you know, if it's possible to, you know, find a group of people that encapsulate everything that you are, be with those people as much as you possibly can. If you can't find people who are everything that you are, find people who are some of the things that you are and breathe in that space, then find another space to breathe.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, the spaciousness to breathe and to breathe into yourself and discover who you are when you're not performing, you know, or when you're not pretending, I think is a really big one. Yeah. Thank you all so much. I have enjoyed being in this space so much. I have felt so much connection to all of you. Your questions have been brilliant and beautiful, and your smiling and nodding faces has been very valuable to me, because I very much feel like I'm here with you. It's been such a joy and a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evenings to join me. I certainly didn't expect that many people to show up, so I'm really happy to be here with you. I'm widely available on social media, so please feel free to follow me. If you have any questions or feedback after this session, any learnings, please get in touch. It's really lovely to connect in that way. I hope to see you all, and hopefully in person at some stage. Thank you so much, Nat, and to Rabble Books for being a community hub, and one that I've heard so many great things about for so long. It's such a joy to get to connect in this way. So yeah, thank you all. Really deep gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Misty and to Nev for coming and sharing space with us tonight. I'm so pleased. This is truly, when I thought of starting a bookshop, this is all of my hopes and dreams, is events like this. So thank you so much for coming and being a part of it.
Thank you. Thanks, Nat. Thanks so much, Misty. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you, and the safety that you created in that. I have so much admiration for your work. So thank you.
Oh, same.
I hope next time I can interview you.
Thank you, Nat, for organising. It's incredible. And thanks to everyone for coming along. Oh, that was lovely. I feel really nice now.
Yay. I hope you all do beautiful things for yourselves now.
Yeah.
Bye, folks.
Have a lovely evening, everybody.
Thank you.
I think you've got the power now, Misty.
Oh, so I shouldn't just leave, or I should just leave?
That's fine. You can leave. That's fine. It's done. I think it'll. At some point, I was worried that my laptop was going to run out of battery because it wasn't recharging. So I gave Misty hosting privileges, and hopefully the recording is uninterrupted. But I think we're fine now. We're good to go.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
Hi, Megan. Bye, Megan.